millionaire. CEO asked her to be his girlfriend. But why would a stranger say yes? Before we begin, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. She was late for a job interview, soaked, broke, and humiliated in the lobby of a 5-star hotel. He was a millionaire, fleeing the engagement he never wanted. And in the middle of chaos, he grabbed her hand and said, "Pretend to love me, just for 3 minutes." She should have walked away, but in those 3 minutes, she found something she hadn't felt in years: safety, and maybe the beginning of something real. They started as a lie, but what happens when the lie starts to feel like the only truth you've ever known? The woman with the broken suitcase. The first thing to betray her was the suitcase. It buckled under pressure. Just as Olivia reached the marble floor of the Langston Hotel, one wheel cracked off with a sound like a gunshot. The zipper burst open, spilling her life across the lobby shirts. A wrapped spatula, a half-torn letter of recommendation. She dropped to her knees, cheeks flushed from the cold, fingers trembling as she scrambled to shove it all back in. Guests passed by in silence, eyes brushing over her, like she wasn't even there. She didn't cry. Not yet. But when she reached for her suitcase handle, a stranger collided into her. Full force, they hit the ground, awkwardly, her shoulder against the marble. His hand catching her back before it could smack the floor. His touch was warm, too familiar for a stranger. "Are you hurt?" he asked, breathless. His voice was low, British, polished. His scent, woodsy cologne, something expensive, something untouchable. I'm fine," she muttered, breath knocked out of her chest. "Are you Olivia?" She looked up, startled. "What? Just say yes. Please! I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend, just for 3 minutes." She blinked. Rain clung to her lashes. Her resume was torn under her knee. And this man, this fast-talking, beautifully dressed stranger, was looking at her like she was his last hope. "Why would I?" "Because she's here," he whispered, eyes darting toward the entrance. "My ex-fiance's mother. If she sees me alone, I'm dead." "You're insane. I'll pay you." Before she could argue, he reached down and gently helped her to her feet. His arm slid around her waist, like it belonged there. Her heart thudded once, then again. Harder. "Just go with it," he murmured, and then louder. "Catherine." What a surprise. The woman who entered was dressed like power. Cream suit, red lipstick, a stare that could cut through bone. Catherine stopped in her tracks. "You're early," she said, then noticed Olivia. "And not alone." "No," the man said smoothly. "This is Olivia, my girlfriend." Olivia tried to smile, but her lips betrayed her. He squeezed her waist just lightly, and she forced the lie to sit on her tongue like it was something she'd practiced. "Lovely," Catherine said, voice cool. "Where did you two meet?" "Farmer's market," he answered without hesitation. "She was buying basil. I was buying strawberries." "Strawberries," Olivia muttered under her breath. He ignored her. His eyes were soft now, no longer panicked, and for a moment, only a moment, he looked at her like he meant it. "You must come to tea," Catherine said. The family would love to meet the woman who managed to thaw the coldest man in New York. Olivia stared at him in disbelief, and he smiled. The lie had only just begun, but something about the way he looked at her, as if he already knew her, made her wonder what would happen if she kept saying yes. Chapter 1. The 3-minute girlfriend. He walked like he was late to something that had already broken his heart. Ethan Montgomery didn't belong in a hotel lobby full of strangers. Not today. Not with the weight of a decision he didn't choose and a wedding he didn't want. His tie was loose, his coat half-buttoned, and his eyes flicked toward the door like a man preparing to disappear. Olivia Carter, meanwhile, was still wondering What kind of universe hated her enough to make her suitcase explode? Her resume scatter, and her stomach twist itself into knots before her job interview. They sat side by side in the hotel lounge 5 minutes later. She in a wet coat and anxiety. He in a suit that smelled like power, but sat like it didn't fit him anymore. "You were incredible in there," Ethan said, watching her fingers tremble around the teacup. She lifted her chin. "I just lied to one of the richest women in Manhattan." You smiled while doing it. She glared at him. That wasn't a compliment. He gave a half smile, the kind that's almost an apology. Then thank you. The silence between them stretched, held only by the occasional clink of silver spoons and the weight of unspoken rules. She didn't know him, didn't want to, but somehow she had sat beside him and nodded her way through a fake love story as if it were her truth. And maybe, for a second, it felt safer than her actual one. "Okay," she said suddenly. "Now you're going to tell me who the hell you are." He extended a hand across the small velvet table. "Ethan Montgomery. I own Montgomery's Table. It's a restaurant on 38th. My ex's mother, Catherine, helped fund it. Heavily." She shook his hand slowly. Confused. "That Catherine? The one I just met. The same? She believes in investment, in control, in contracts, including the one that said I'd marry her daughter." Olivia blinked. "You were engaged to Claire Whitmore. It wasn't real. Not to me. It was part of a deal. I give the restaurant my name. She gives it financial protection. Catherine thought a marriage would seal the brand, and you agreed to that." He shrugged, staring at the chandelier above them. "At the time, I thought it was the cost of the dream. And now?" He looked at her again, not like a stranger, like someone who had finally stopped pretending. "Now, I want to pay for my dream differently." From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small white envelope and slid it across the table to her. Inside was a check, a real one. "I need more than 3 minutes. I need 2 weeks." She tilted her head. "You want me to keep pretending we're together long enough to make Catherine back off? She needs to believe I'm serious about someone else, that there's no space for Claire anymore. Let me guess until the next tea party." He smiled. "There are dinners, gallery events, a fundraiser. If she believes it, she'll stop pushing the marriage. She might even withdraw her investment, but at least I won't be lying to myself anymore." Olivia didn't answer right away. She glanced down at her boots, wet, peeling at the sole. She thought about her unpaid student loans, the broken kitchen mixer at her mother's house, the dream that brought her here, hanging by a thread. "How much?" she asked, voice low. Ethan hesitated, then said, $5, 00, for 2 weeks, plus expenses, housing, if you need it." She inhaled slowly. That was 3 months of breathing room, maybe more. "You don't seem like the desperate type," she murmured. "Today I am." There it was, the truth, beneath the tailored suit and the polished words. He wasn't just running from a wedding. He was running from himself. Olivia leaned back. She didn't believe in fairy tales, not anymore, but she understood what it meant to lie just long enough to buy yourself time. "Fine," she said, "but there are rules." "Of course. No physical contact unless we rehearse it. No real personal questions. You tell me everything I need to know. Dates, details, what your mother's favorite flower is. I won't be caught lying to a woman who could ruin both our lives." "Deal," he said, nodding. "And no falling in love," she added, smirking. He raised a brow. "Was that a rule for me or for you?" "It's for both of us," she said. Too quickly, he stood and offered his hand again. "Then let's begin." She looked at it for a moment before taking it. His grip was warm, steady, nothing like the first time. "I need coffee first," she muttered. "I know the best place in town." And as they walked out of the hotel, him with his polished shoes and broken heart, her with damp boots and a fake smile they hadn't yet practiced, Neither of them noticed that the lie had already started to feel strangely real. Chapter 2. The Man Behind the Menu. Ethan cooked like he was trying to forget. That night, Olivia sat on the edge of the sleek marble counter in his apartment, watching as he diced onions with methodical precision. The kitchen looked like something out of a design catalog. Brushed gold fixtures, matte black cabinets, knives lined up like soldiers. But the man inside it, he was unraveling, quietly. "You always cook when you're stressed?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Only when I don't want to talk." "Perfect. I talk enough for both of us." That earned her a small smile. She'd learned quickly that Ethan didn't give those away often. She looked around. The place was spotless, curated. There were no family photos, no clutter, just cold elegance and perfect silence. "You live here alone?" He glanced at her. "You mean, am I one of those tragic rich men with empty hallways and too many glasses for one person?" "I mean," she said, smirking, "do you always eat burnt risotto and pretend you're not suffocating?" He paused, knife midair. Then, to her surprise, he laughed. "It wasn't always like this," he said softly. Olivia watched him from the counter, not interrupting. "When I first opened Montgomery's, it was about food, about memory. My dad used to cook on Sundays badly, but it meant something. He'd throw oregano on everything like it was glitter. When he died, the kitchen went quiet. I wanted to bring that sound back. So you opened a restaurant. I opened a dream." He plated the risotto creamy, golden, with shaved truffle, and slid it in front of her. "And then," she asked, fork in hand. "And then came Catherine, her daughter, the contract, investors with expectations. Suddenly, I wasn't making memories. I was managing optics." Olivia took a bite. It was rich, subtle, the kind of flavor you chase but never quite pin down. "Why didn't you just walk away?" He leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Because you don't walk away from a drowning ship when everyone you hired is still on board." She didn't answer, because she knew what that kind of pressure felt like. She'd lived it in quiet kitchens and short paychecks. She saw it now in his hands, the way they shook, ever so slightly, even as he pretended they didn't. "What about Claire?" she asked. "Did you ever love her?" "No," he said without hesitation. "But I convinced myself I could." That silence between them filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was heavy with things they hadn't said yet. "So why me?" Olivia asked finally. "Out of all the people you could have hired to play the perfect fake girlfriend, why me?" Ethan set down his glass, walked to the far side of the room, and returned with a folder. He slid it across the table. Inside was a single sheet. "Un résumé," pulled from the culinary networking site she'd joined last month. "You did research on me," she said, voice sharp. "I didn't plan to, but I saw your profile. I knew you were arriving in New York today. When I saw you in the lobby, dragging that poor suitcase, I just knew." "Knew what?" "That you weren't like anyone in my world. You weren't polished. You weren't rehearsed. You were real. And I needed that." Olivia didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't a compliment. It was a confession. He needed someone who reminded him what truth looked like. "I'm not an actress," she whispered. "Good," he said. "I'm tired of pretending." He pulled a notebook from the counter and flipped it open. Inside were scribbled lines, page after page of stories they hadn't yet lived. "Our first kiss," he read, "was on a fire escape. You had wine on your lips. It was raining. I kissed you anyway." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a bit dramatic." "Catherine will love it." "What if she asks what my favorite dish is?" "Pasta primavera, with too much garlic. You make it when you're homesick." "That's actually true," she said, blinking. "I know," he replied quietly. "And your favorite?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Mac and cheese, with ketchup." She stared at him, horrified. "You should go to prison." Catherine would probably agree. They laughed. And in that moment, in the middle of a scripted rehearsal for a love that didn't exist, something unscripted bloomed between them. Something soft, something dangerous. Ethan looked at her. Longer than necessary. We should start rehearsing tomorrow. A full story. From the beginning. You mean where we met? The basil and strawberries story. He nodded. We'll need to practice how we look at each other. How we hold hands. What kind of couple we are. We're not a couple. Olivia reminded him. I know, he said, but we'll have to be believable. She looked down at her fork, then up again. Are you sure you can handle pretending? Ethan's voice dropped to something low and unreadable. Are you? She didn't answer, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure. Chapter 3. The Deal. The dress hung on the closet door like a threat. Black silk, barely structured, elegant in the way. Wealth always is quiet, sharp, uninviting. Olivia stared at it from across the room, still in her threadbare pajama shirt, toes curling into the cold hardwood floor. She hadn't worn anything this expensive in her life, and now she was supposed to wear it. To dinner with Ethan's ex-fiancé and her mother. Are you sure this is necessary? She called out. Absolutely, came Ethan's voice from the hallway. Catherine watches everything. You showing up, looking like you're already family is half the battle. Olivia sighed. And the other half? He appeared in the doorway, then, already dressed. The suit fit him like memory tailored, clean, devastating. His tie was navy. His cufflinks gleamed, but it was his expression that unsettled her. He wasn't nervous. He was steady, like he'd done this before, like he'd learned long ago to wear masks better than any actor. The other half, he said gently, is surviving the performance. She turned back to the dress, still unsure if this was bravery or surrender. They arrived at Orem just after 7. Zero, the Upper East Side restaurant, was a temple of old money. Gold chandeliers, velvet booths, candlelight that flattered the powerful. Every step Olivia took echoed a little too loudly. Every glance they received was measured, coded. Ethan's hand rested on the small of her back as the maitre d' escorted them to the private dining room. It wasn't possessive, but it wasn't indifferent either. Breathe, he whispered as they reached the table. She didn't realize she'd stopped. Catherine sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 investors and Claire, Ethan's ex-fiancée, who looked like she'd been carved from marble. Her dress was burgundy. Her smile was brittle. Ethan, Claire said, raising her glass, so quick to move on. How refreshing. Good evening, he replied smoothly. I'd like you all to meet Olivia, my girlfriend. The words still felt foreign in her mouth, but Olivia smiled anyway. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. For the next 40 minutes, Olivia played her part. She spoke about her childhood in Oregon, her passion for cooking, the first date where Ethan burned risotto and they ended up ordering pizza. They laughed at the right places, exchanged glances, rehearsed enough to look natural. Ethan squeezed her hand under the table once, just once, but it was enough to make her stomach twist. Then came the question. Catherine set down her wine glass with the grace of a seasoned predator. Olivia, she said, what would you say is Ethan's most redeeming quality? Time froze. Olivia hadn't rehearsed this part. She glanced at Ethan, who met her gaze, but didn't help her. He wanted to see what she'd say. Her heart beat like it wanted out of her chest. Then she answered. He silences the world, she said softly. When he walks into a room, everything slows down, not because of how he looks, but because of how he listens. He hears things you don't say out loud. That's rare. A hush fell over the table. Even Ethan looked caught off guard. Interesting, Catherine murmured. She turned to Ethan. And you? What is it about Olivia that drew you in? He didn't blink. She sees me. Not the restaurant. Not the name. Just me. Claire rolled her eyes. "This sounds more like theater than love," she muttered. "Then it's the most honest performance I've ever given." Ethan replied. The waiter arrived with dessert lavender sorbet with honey crunch. But Olivia barely touched hers. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that somewhere between the rehearsed memories and fake smiles, she had told the truth. She really had seen something in him, and worse, he'd seen something in her. In the car ride home, Olivia finally exhaled. "I almost died in there," she whispered. Ethan glanced over. "You were brilliant. Don't flatter me. You're terrifyingly good at this." "So are you?" She looked out the window. The city passed them by in streaks of light and noise, like the world was still moving too fast, while something inside her slowed to a crawl. "We need to be careful," she said. "This is getting complicated." He nodded. "Then we rehearse harder. Every detail. The past, our inside jokes, our first kiss." She raised an eyebrow. "Our first kiss." Catherine asked if you're really the one. "She's gonna watch everything. You sure you're ready to lie that well?" Ethan's voice dropped to something dangerous and quiet. "What if I'm not lying?" The silence stretched between them like a thread ready to snap. She looked away. "We'll meet tomorrow. Luigi's Noia." "Start building the backstory. Farmer's market," he said, already imagining it. "Strawberries and basil," she muttered. He smiled. The start of a perfect lie. But neither of them wanted to admit that what terrified them most was how good it already felt. Chapter 4. The ghost in her chest. They met at Luigi's just after 9, the windows fogged with the breath of morning. Jazz spilled from the old jukebox like a memory too worn to fade. The walls were lined with black and white photos, a crooked wine shelf, and enough chipped charm to feel like the kind of place you could fall in love with someone by accident. Table in the back for the lovers. Luigi winked, leading them through. Olivia didn't correct him. She sat across from Ethan, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, and tried to remember why she'd agreed to all this. Why she was here pretending to love a man who kept looking at her like he already believed it. Ethan pulled out a notebook and 2 pens. "Let's build our story," he said, sliding one toward her. "You're seriously this organized?" She smirked. "If we're going to lie, we need to do it with conviction." They started with the basics. "We met at the farmer's market," she said. "I was buying basil. I was buying overpriced strawberries." He added, "You knocked over a box. You tried to catch me, and you thought it was on purpose. You lied and said you were a food truck chef." They laughed. They wrote it down. Then came their first fight. "You left the spice jars out of order," she said. "You used my kitchen towels as napkins. You said my playlist was boring." It was more laughter, more notes. It should have been just a script, just lines to memorize. But somewhere between the fake first kiss on the balcony and the trip to a cabin in the Catskills that never happened, Olivia stopped pretending. Ethan looked at her as she described their rainy weekend, how they slept on the floor because the bed was too perfect, and she caught him staring, his pen frozen in midair. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, too softly, but his eyes said something else entirely. They kept writing until the table was covered in scribbled memories. 5 pizza crusts and a silence that had grown too thick. Later that evening, Olivia returned to the studio apartment she was renting by the week. The ceiling leaked. The radiator hissed. The floors creaked like old knees. She sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the pen Ethan had given her, and tried to breathe past the tightness in her chest. It wasn't love. Not yet. But something was stirring, something old and half-buried. A feeling she had buried after Portland. After the man who said he'd stay, then disappeared without explanation. After she found herself staring at an empty kitchen, the smell of burnt garlic still clinging to the walls. She had promised herself she'd never trust a man who smiled with secrets. And now, here was Ethan, smiling and secretive and making her feel things she had no language for. She pulled open the drawer beside her bed and took out a photo. Just her and her father, flower in their hair, standing over a pie that had completely collapsed in the oven. He'd laughed so hard, she remembered, said failure always tasted better with butter. He had died a year later. Olivia hadn't cooked for months after that. She pressed the photo to her chest, closed her eyes, and tried to remind herself that none of this was real. Not the strawberries, not the balcony, not the man with hazel eyes and hands that always found her elbow when she started to fall. So why did her chest ache like it remembered something she'd never actually lived? The next night, Ethan invited her over. "We need to rehearse the part where we first said, 'I love you,'" he said. "We haven't even kissed." She replied, "That's tomorrow." He said it like a joke. She didn't laugh. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and roasted tomatoes. Music played softly from the speakers. Something instrumental, haunting, like a love story being whispered through strings. She noticed the small things. 2 wine glasses already poured, a blanket folded over the couch, a single red basil plant on the windowsill. "We should keep the details simple," she said, sitting at the counter. "Too many stories, and we'll trip. Or maybe we stop making it complicated," Ethan said. "Maybe we just say the truth and let it sound like a lie. You really believe we can fool her?" "I don't care about her anymore," he admitted. "I care about you." Olivia looked up sharply. The air between them shifted. "Ethan," she said carefully, "don't say things you don't mean." "I don't." "This is a job?" It was. "And now?" He didn't answer, just stepped closer. He didn't touch her, but the space between them became unbearable. "You're not supposed to be kind," she whispered. "You're not supposed to notice when my hands shake or when I can't breathe." "Too late," he said. There was a pause. Then she stepped back, picking up her coat. She couldn't do this. Not yet. "I should go," she murmured. "Olivia." She turned at the door, her voice low and steady. "There's a ghost in my chest," she said. "It wears the face of someone who left, and some nights it still knocks." "Then let me wait at the door," Ethan said, "until it stops." She didn't reply, just left, because sometimes, even when a man says the exact right thing, your body still remembers the pain of trusting someone too soon. Chapter 5. The proposal that wasn't. It wasn't supposed to be a real date. It was just another appearance, another scene in the script they'd been rehearsing since the lie first tumbled out between them like a dropped glass, too fragile to hold, too sharp to deny. The invitation came from Catherine, naturally. A Whitmore Foundation dinner. Ethan had told Olivia, "Just show up, smile, be charming, and wear something that makes them wonder if I've finally lost my mind. So, what I always wear." He laughed. But behind the grin was something that didn't laugh at all. The event was held in a ballroom that looked like it had never heard the word ordinary. Crystal chandeliers hung like constellations. Waiters moved like synchronized dancers. Every guest wore the kind of clothing that didn't wrinkle and never repeated. Olivia walked in beside Ethan, and for the first time, her hands didn't shake. She wore a navy blue dress that felt like soft armor. Her curls were pinned. Her makeup whispered instead of shouted. But it wasn't the dress, or the heels, or the way the room parted when they entered that made her feel different. It was the way Ethan looked at her, like she wasn't pretending anymore, like neither of them were. "I hope I'm playing my part well," she whispered, looping her arm through his. "You're not playing," he whispered back. Dinner passed in a blur of speeches and wine and Catherine's razor-sharp glances. They danced once, just once, Ethan's hand on the small of her back, her fingers resting on his chest. A song she didn't recognize filled the room. And for 2.5 minutes, she forgot everyone else existed. "You're not looking at anyone else," she murmured. "I haven't for a while." When the song ended, she stepped away, her breath shaky. "Don't," she warned. "Don't say anything. You can't take back." "I won't," he said. "But I might say something. The proposal didn't happen in the ballroom. It happened outside, under a streetlight, where the air smelled like rain and exhaust and the city's usual indifference. Ethan held her hand too long as they waited for the car. "Come home with me," he said quietly. "You already paid for 2 weeks of pretending. Don't push your luck. This isn't about luck anymore." "Then what is it?" He pulled something from his coat pocket, not a ring box, just a folded note. Plain white paper, creased and warm from his hand. She didn't open it right away. "I wrote it last week," he said, "when I started thinking about what it would be like if this weren't fake. Ethan, it's not a proposal. Not the kind you think." "Then what is it?" "A thought, a hope, a maybe." She opened the letter with careful fingers. Inside, 5 words written in a hurried scrawl. "What if we stopped pretending?" That was it. No promises, no glittering ring, just a quiet truth she wasn't ready to name. Her throat closed. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I'm learning, and if I run, I'll wait." She didn't answer. She couldn't, because her heart was suddenly loud and stupid and reckless, and it kept saying yes in 1,000 unspoken ways. But her mouth said something else. This was never part of the deal. She handed him back the note, folded it, and placed it gently in his palm, like she was returning something sacred. "Good night, Ethan." And then she turned and walked away, not because she didn't want to stay, but because she was falling fast, terrifying, inevitable, and she needed just one more night to pretend she still had a choice. Chapter 6. The One Who Stayed. The message came just after midnight. One line, no punctuation. "Come if you can." Olivia stared at the screen, wrapped in a blanket, sitting in the dark of her apartment, with tea gone cold and a storm drumming against the windows. She hadn't heard from Ethan in 2 days, not since the night she handed back his folded note and walked away. She thought the silence was his answer. She didn't expect the text, didn't expect the ache it stirred in her chest. She was out the door in 10 minutes, raincoat thrown over pajamas, sneakers half-tied. She didn't tell herself why. She just went. The elevator opened to the scent of burnt garlic and something boiling over. She found Ethan in the kitchen, leaning heavily against the counter. The stove was on. A pot bubbled furiously behind him, forgotten. His shirt was wrinkled. His sleeves were pushed up, and there was a cut on his hand, barely bleeding, where a knife must have slipped. "Ethan." He turned too slowly, like it took more energy than he had left. "Hey," he said, voice hoarse. That was all. He didn't fake a smile, didn't offer a joke, just leaned against the marble, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "What happened?" "The staff walked out," he said, staring down at the floor. "Half of them, at least." Catherine pulled 3 suppliers. The critic from the Herald called us a restaurant held together by scandal and sentiment. Investors are nervous. Reservations down. Press won't stop calling. He paused. "I thought I could carry it. Thought if I worked harder, talked louder, cooked better, it'd be enough." He looked at her, and in that look was something rawer than she'd ever seen. "But tonight, I couldn't breathe, and I didn't know who else to call." Something inside her broke. Not because he was falling apart, but because he finally stopped pretending he wasn't. She stepped forward and turned off the stove. Without a word, she filled a glass with water, handed it to him, and then wrapped her arms around his shaking frame. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there, forehead resting against her shoulder, and let her be the quiet he needed. "You should have called sooner," she whispered. "You left. You didn't stop me." That night, she stayed, She cleaned up the spilled sauce, wrapped his hand, made him tea. He wouldn't drink, and when he finally fell asleep on the couch, body curled, like someone who hadn't rested in weeks, she sat beside him and watched the rain streak the windows. She didn't touch him again, didn't try to fill the silence. She just stayed. At sunrise, Ethan stirred. His voice was barely audible. "You're still here?" She didn't look away. "Yeah, I am." Why? She could have said anything. Could have reminded him this was just a job, that she was being paid, that this wasn't real. But none of those things felt true anymore. Because when it stopped being pretend, I didn't know how to walk away. He closed his eyes. "What do we do now?" "You get up," she said gently. "You fight for what's left. For the kitchen, the team, the name. And maybe for me, if you still want to." He opened his eyes, and in that look was something unspoken and permanent. "I want to," she smiled, soft and sad and brave. "Then let's start again. But this time, no more lies." He nodded, and as the light filled the room, she reached for his hand cut, tired and trembling, and held it like it was something worth saving. Because he was. Chapter 7. The Woman Who Sees Me. Ethan didn't say where they were going. He just showed up outside Veritas at 3:00 p.m., leaning against the hood of his car with 2 coffees and a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon. Olivia raised a brow when she saw him. "Is this a bribe?" "It's a detour. I have work." "Grant said you could go." I asked. "You asked my boss for time off." "I traded him tickets to the Met Gala." She blinked. "You have Met Gala tickets. I know a guy." "Of course you do." He opened the door for her. She got in. Sometimes, love starts with things unspoken. Like the fact that he remembered her coffee order, down to the oat milk, and the half packet of raw sugar. Or that she didn't ask questions. Not right away. She trusted the silence between them more than she ever trusted perfect words. 2 hours later, they pulled up to a house with peeling paint and a porch swing that groaned in the breeze. It wasn't what she expected. Not glass towers or modern estates. Just a house on the edge of the Hudson Valley, shaded by trees, and a memory Ethan hadn't touched in years. "You grew up here?" she asked softly. He nodded, staring out the windshield. "My dad built that porch, said no man should ever marry without knowing how to fix his own steps." He sounds stubborn. He was. They walked slowly up the gravel drive. Olivia noticed the small things, overgrown weeds, a cracked window, the smell of pine and rust, and a life once lived. Inside, it was dusty but not lifeless. A wall still held framed photos. A kitchen drawer refused to close all the way. And in the hallway, there was a chart etched in pencil on the wall. Heights measured year by year. Initials faded, but still legible. E.M. Age 12, she whispered, touching it lightly. Ethan said nothing, just stood behind her, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense like he was bracing for something. "Why bring me here?" she asked. "Because you've seen the parts of me that are built, the pieces I polish. But this..." He gestured around them. "This is where everything cracked first." They sat on the old couch. Springs creaked. Dust motes danced in the light. He didn't rush the story. He didn't need to. His father was a chef, a small-time one, owned a struggling diner off Route 9, and taught Ethan how to cut onions before he could spell Montgomery. They were poor. They didn't talk about it. But Ethan remembered the sound of overdue bills hitting the table, the way his mom looked at the cracked ceiling like it owed her an apology, the smell of burnt toast on cold mornings. His dad died the summer Ethan turned 18, left behind a recipe book, a broken oven, and a dream Ethan didn't know how to carry. "I started Montgomery's table to keep him close," Ethan said. Every dish had a piece of him. Garlic rubbed too hard, sauces with too much wine, plates that weren't perfect, but always full. And then came Catherine, Olivia whispered, and the perfection started to matter more than the passion. He looked down at his hands, scarred from years in kitchens, though he tried to hide it. I've spent so much of my life trying to prove I belonged in rooms like hers, that I wasn't just a boy from a failing house with nothing but a knife and a last name. She didn't try to fix it, didn't say he was more than that, because the truth was, he was that too. And what made him remarkable wasn't that he overcame it. It was that he carried it and still chose to love. As the sun dipped below the trees, Ethan stood and opened a cupboard, pulled out a dusty jar. Inside were basil seeds. A handwritten label read, "For next spring." He said basil was hope. Ethan murmured, "You plant it not knowing what kind of season's coming, but you plant it anyway." Olivia stepped closer. "You still believe that?" He looked at her, really looked, like she wasn't just someone he needed, but someone he trusted. "I didn't," he said. "Not until you—" She reached for his hand. "You don't have to perform with me." "Ethan, I don't want to." "Then don't." There was no kiss, no dramatic promise, just his fingers curling gently around hers, and a silence so sacred it felt like prayer. Because in this quiet, abandoned house in the dust and the light, and the ghost of a boy who still remembered how to burn garlic, he let her in, and she stayed. Chapter 8. Breaking the Promise. They didn't see each other for 3 days. Not because they fought, but because sometimes distance comes in softer forms. Unread messages. "Sorry I missed your call." And nights when the silence between two people fills every room before they even enter it. Olivia busied herself with Veritas, new menu trials, prep hours that bled into night. She told herself it was the job, the pace, the pressure. But the truth was, she was afraid of what she was starting to feel, afraid that she already felt too much. Ethan, meanwhile, was losing battles Olivia couldn't see. Catherine had returned, not in person. She was too strategic for that, but through lawyers, phone calls, and investors who began quietly withdrawing their support. One supplier canceled. A food critic who once adored Montgomery's wrote that the restaurant had lost its taste for itself. And then came the final blow, a withdrawal of Catherine's family trust funds from all the joint ventures tied to Ethan's business name. He didn't tell Olivia. He didn't want to weigh her down, so he carried it all: the closing books, the mounting debt, the faces of his staff trying to smile through crumbling paychecks. And then, late one Friday, he collapsed. She found out from the restaurant's manager, a voicemail. No context, just panic. Olivia dropped everything. She arrived at the emergency room, breathless, her apron still on, flour smudged across her sleeve. The fluorescent lights felt too bright. The air smelled like antiseptic and fear. "Ethan Montgomery," she asked the nurse. "He's stable," the woman said gently. "Dehydration, stress, exhaustion. Hasn't eaten or slept properly in days." Olivia closed her eyes. "Can I see him?" "He asked for you." He was hooked to an IV, pale. His eyes had lost their usual sharpness. But when he saw her, he tried to sit up, still performing. "Even now." "Don't," she said, crossing the room. "Just stay still. I'm fine. You passed out in your own kitchen. Ethan, I didn't want you to know." "Well," she whispered, "now I do." He looked at her like she was a secret he wasn't supposed to need. "I made a promise," he said quietly. "What promise?" "That I wouldn't let this ruin you." She sat down, heart already tightening. "What are you talking about?" "The restaurant's crumbling. The name, the partnerships. I can't drag you down with me." "I won't." "Ethan, we had a deal. Remember? 2 weeks? Pretend no strings." She froze. The words hit sharper than she expected. "You want to go back to that now? It's safer." "For who?" He didn't answer, so she stood. "You're not pushing me away to protect me," she said. "You're pushing me away because you're scared to ask me to stay still." He said nothing, so she walked toward the door, hand on the frame, back straight. But before she stepped out, she whispered, without turning, "You're not breaking the deal, Ethan. You're breaking the promise we never dared to speak." And then she left. She didn't cry, not right away. She went home, took off her shoes, stared at the basil plant on the windowsill he gave her, and then she cried like she hadn't cried since Portland. Not for the man who left back then, but for the man now who had let her go while needing her the most. The next morning, she found something in her mailbox. No return address, just her name and handwriting she recognized too well. Inside the envelope, a letter, unsent, unfinished, scrawled on what looked like a Montgomery's table order pad. "I didn't mean to fall in love with you. Not here. Not like this." But it happened slowly, in between the burnt risotto and the way you forget your keys every time you leave the apartment. "I think the scariest part isn't that you're in my life now. It's that I don't know how to go back to before you were." She folded the note, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "To no one." Then don't. Chapter 9. The letter he never sent. The letter was only half a page, folded twice, no signature, no date, but Olivia knew exactly when it was written in the in-between, that fragile space where something real had begun to bloom beneath the lies, but neither of them had been brave enough to say it aloud. She read it again and again. The words didn't say, "I love you." They didn't have to. They said, "I see you." They said, "You matter." They said, "I'm trying." And for Olivia, that mattered more than any polished speech or grand gesture. Because in a world where people hid behind performance, Ethan had written down something that cost him nothing and everything. The truth. She showed up at the restaurant before opening the next morning. Montgomery's table was quiet, too quiet. A skeleton staff moved inside like ghosts. The air was thick with uncertainty. The prep boards were clean. No orders, no laughter, just the hum of a kitchen trying to pretend it wasn't breaking. Ethan stood in the back. He didn't notice her at first. He was slicing tomatoes like they were the only thing still listening to him. She walked up, set the folded letter on the counter beside his cutting board, and waited. He froze when he saw it, then looked up, tired eyes, unshaven jaw, apron stained with the weight of the week. "Where did you find that?" he asked quietly. "Doesn't matter. I wasn't going to send it." "I know." It felt selfish. It was honest. He didn't speak, so she did. "Do you want me to go?" His eyes met hers, slow, raw. "No." "Then say it." "What?" "Say something real. Ethan, stop protecting me from your feelings like they're fire. I already burned for you, and I'm still here." The silence between them was long and sharp. Then, "I thought if I let you in, I'd lose everything. And turns out I started losing the moment I let you go." She stepped behind the counter, took the knife from his hand, set it down, then pressed her forehead against his chest. Quietly, "I never asked you to be perfect," she whispered. "I've never been anything close." "Good." They stayed there for a long time. No kiss, no speech. Just two people learning how to be near each other again without fear, without fiction. Later that afternoon, they sat together at the back booth, the one with the broken leg and the window that overlooked a sliver of the city. She reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook. Inside were the stories they'd written together. Fake ones, silly ones. The fake anniversary, the fake fight over his terrible playlist, the fake mountain trip with the fireplace that never worked. She handed it to him. "Let's keep writing," she said. "You sure? But no more fiction. Just the parts that are true." He flipped through the pages, paused at one titled "The Balcony Kiss," and smiled. That one could still happen. he said. She smiled back. Maybe, but only if there's wine and no ketchup on the mac and cheese. He laughed. You'll never forgive me for that. Will you? Never. That night, Olivia returned to her apartment, opened her own notebook, the one where she kept recipes and memories, and wrote a single line at the top of a blank page. Sometimes love starts with a lie, but it only survives when the truth is louder. She looked at her phone. No new messages, but she didn't need one. Because for the first time, she knew. He was still there, and more importantly, so was she. By choice. Chapter 10. The Wedding in the Wind. They never planned a wedding. Not really. There was no venue deposit, no Pinterest board, no seating chart scrawled on a napkin at midnight. And yet, one chilly Sunday in early spring, Olivia stood barefoot on the roof of Montgomery's table, her hair pinned up with sprigs of mint and laughter in her eyes, watching Ethan try to fix a crooked folding chair as the wind tugged at his shirt. This was your idea, remember? He called out. You said it was romantic. I said it was cheap. Same thing when you're in love. They weren't dressed like a bride and groom. He wore his usual dark slacks and the same shirt he'd worn the night they met. She wore a cream-colored dress that didn't fit perfectly, but moved like water when the wind touched it. There were no guests, no flowers, just a rooftop, the hum of the city below, and 2 cups of basil lemonade sitting on the edge of the table beside them. Do you have anything prepared? She asked, her voice softer now. Ethan pulled a folded paper from his back pocket, then hesitated, crumpled it gently, set it down. No, he said. I just want to talk to you. She nodded, so he stepped forward, took both her hands in his, and looked at her like she was something he'd almost lost and never wanted to risk losing again. I used to think love was about grand gestures, he said. The kind you photograph, announce, turn into headlines. But now I know. It's about the small things. The way you refill my coffee, even when you're mad at me. The way you dance when you think no one's watching. The way your silence feels safer than anyone else's words. You didn't just save me, Olivia. You reminded me who I was before I started pretending. She didn't answer right away, just stepped a little closer. So their foreheads touched. You weren't pretending that night in the hospital, she whispered. And you weren't pretending when you wrote that letter. No, he breathed. So don't start pretending now. He smiled, eyes shining with something softer than joy, deeper than relief. Love, the real kind. The kind that doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stays. Olivia Carter, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Will you keep choosing me, even on the boring days, even when the basil dies and we're too tired to cook? She laughed, wiping a tear from her cheek. Yes, she said. Even then I guess. This is our wedding. He smiled. The wedding in the wind. And the only promise we make is to stay, no matter how quiet it gets. They kissed then, not like it was the end of a movie, but like it was the beginning of a life, slow, steady, certain. The wind lifted her hair. A napkin fluttered off the table and danced above the city. The sky didn't cheer, the clouds didn't part, but somewhere deep inside them, something settled. The ache, the fear, the loneliness they'd both carried, finally exhaled. That night, Olivia stood in the kitchen barefoot, stirring sauce on the stove, while Ethan folded napkins behind her. They were home. No contracts, no lies, no roles to play, just her humming under her breath, him sneaking up behind her. 2 rings simple, silver resting beside the stove, because neither of them liked wearing jewelry while cooking. You know, he said. I think the risotto might finally come out right tonight. She turned and smiled. A little teary? It already did. Only for 3 minutes, narrated softly, like a memory being whispered through time. It started with 3 minutes, 3 reckless, improvised chaotic minutes in a hotel lobby where nothing made sense except the way her hand fit into his and the way his voice trembled when he said her name like he'd known it forever. But what they didn't know then was that love doesn't always arrive with warning signs. Sometimes it walks in wearing a broken suitcase. Sometimes it's hidden inside a lie you never meant to tell. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it finds you in the one place you stopped looking. They never signed a contract. They never sent formal invitations. They never checked the boxes that said real. But they chose each other, day after day, beneath the spotlight, after the applause, in silence, in burnt risotto, in basil and strawberries, and in every tiny moment where it would have been easier to walk away, but they stayed. That's the thing. No one tells you about love. It doesn't have to start perfectly. It just has to begin honestly. And if it's real, it will rise. Even through the ashes of a lie, would you risk everything for a love that was never supposed to be real? Would you stay if the person who faked a future with you offered their heart for real? If this story moved you even just for a few minutes, I hope you'll stay a little longer, because the next story, it goes even deeper. And maybe, just maybe, it's already calling your name. Tell us in the comments, have you ever fallen for someone you weren't supposed to? And if you're still someone who believes in unexpected love, we'll see you in the next story. Because some hearts were always meant to find each other, even in the most impossible places.